"Oh my, carrying such a large suitcase. Are you going on a trip?" asked my mother-in-law. "No, I'm going back to my parents' house," I replied. "What?" Her eyes widened in surprise. It seems mother-in-law couldn't quite process what I had just said. "I'm tired of the housework and the constant nagging. Please have a happy life with Connor," I continued. "What? Wait a minute," she objected, but I slipped past her and headed outside, dragging my heavy suitcase. I got on the bus to return to my family's home. "My name is Cecilia. I married Connor 4 years ago, and now he runs a one-bedroom apartment where we live together," I reflected. "The apartment we rent is moderately high-end, costing $2,000 a month, something Connor can't afford on his own," I admitted. "The reason we can live in such a luxurious apartment is solely due to my workload and salary. I'm somewhat embarrassed to say it, but I'm an ambitious career woman working in sales for a large corporation. Working from morning till night, starting early and working late is the norm for me," I explained. Sacrificing my private life to stay on top in sales, I started living in this apartment because I wanted to enjoy a lavish lifestyle, at least while I'm home. But my luxurious and peaceful days are beginning to slip away, I confessed. The cause of this disturbance is mother-in-law, who has recently become a permanent guest in our apartment. I sometimes ask Connor to do the housework since I'm busy with my job, but instead of doing it himself, he calls mother-in-law and unloads the work on her. I lamented. Mother-in-law, being mother-in-law, willingly comes over and does all the housework, so Connor's domestic skills never improve. Initially visiting our apartment twice a week, she now seems to live in our place. If it were just housework, I might have simply been grateful and not complained, I added. What's been bothering me is mother-in-law's excessive interference. Why doesn't Cecilia quit her job after all this time? I can't possibly tell her it's because Connor's earnings are insufficient, so I reply with a shallow "I'm sorry." She even adds comments like, "A good wife bears children early on," which continue to trouble me. I continued. Certainly, I couldn't say that Connor was cooperative. His old-fashioned remarks, even anachronistic at times, were draining me, especially after long hours at work. Finally, he started to say things like, "You fold the clothes wrong," or "Using the dishwasher is not good." I couldn't help but wish he would leave if he continued to complain, I admitted. Of course, I wasn't just silently putting up with this. I talked to Connor about it, but he wouldn't take me seriously. At first, he seemed to be listening to me sincerely, but in the end, he always sided with his mother, saying, "But Mom is right." When I lost patience with his mother, who continued to live with us without paying rent or for food and demanded she either pay or leave, Connor sided with mother-in-law and decided to let her live with us for free, I recounted. Slowly but surely, the paradise I had created with my earnings was being taken over by mother-in-law. One day, after talking to my parents on the phone, I began making plans for a small party and decided to invite my parents over to our home. My mother's birthday was approaching, and I anticipated getting paid time off for the occasion. Knowing my parents had expressed interest in seeing our apartment, I saw this as a perfect opportunity. Excitedly, I started planning and called out to Connor, who was lounging on the sofa, absorbed in his mobile phone. "Hey Connor, I'm thinking of inviting my parents over next month. Will you join us?" I asked hopefully. Connor and my parents had only met once during our marriage meeting, and they hadn't interacted much. I hoped the dinner party would be pleasant, and I even considered inviting mother-in-law if she was available. "What? There's no way we're letting your poorly dressed parents into this apartment," Connor snapped back. "Excuse me, how can you say that?" I yelled, shocked by his comment. Connor put down his phone, plugged his ears, and glared at me. "But it's true. They were wearing cheap clothes when we went for the marriage meeting," he defended. Struggling to contain my anger, my fists clenched. I was accustomed to harsh words directed at me, but I couldn't stand my parents being insulted. My anger simmered, and I had to calm myself before speaking. "I don't want to say this, but your mother-in-law is no different from my mother. What's so poor about my parents? Are your parents big corporate bosses or something?" Of course, that wasn't the case. His father was a salaried worker, and his mother was a homemaker from an ordinary family. Still, Connor scowled, clearly annoyed by my words. "At least they make more money than your parents. We didn't have to rely on a scholarship for college like you did," he retorted proudly, puffing out his chest. "I got a scholarship because I wanted to go to college on my own without depending on my parents," I shot back. I nearly said, "It's not like you can't leave your parents," but I bit back my words. Arguing here wouldn't solve anything. All I wanted was to invite my parents to the apartment. We won't live together forever. I'm just asking if I can invite them for one day, maybe half a day. That's why I'm saying no. If you can't accept it, then leave this apartment. What? Why are you talking about me leaving? If you can't obey me, I don't need you. I don't even want to live with you. Connor spat out with bitterness, and something inside me snapped. Fine, if that's what you want, I'll leave. But once I'm gone, I won't be paying the rent here, okay? Can you afford to live on your own, Connor? Worried about money? My mom's a homemaker, but she makes good money. $2,000 in rent is nothing to her. I thought Connor was just venting, but it turned out he planned to rely on his mother's income. I was more stunned than angry. I couldn't comprehend Connor's dependent mindset. Why did I marry this man? I never thought I'd see the day when I could trust my judgment of men. I muttered to myself as I slammed down the planner I'd been writing in and pulled a suitcase from the closet. The closet was filled with items my mother-in-law had brought over, and my belongings were pushed to the back. Connor seemed taken aback as he watched me calmly pack, but in the end, he said nothing. I finished packing, headed for the door without a word to Connor, and almost ran into my mother-in-law just back from shopping. "Oh, such a big luggage. Are you going on a trip?" she asked. "No, I'm going back to my parents' house," I replied. "Ha!" My mother-in-law seemed unable to process what I'd said, her eyes widening. "Thank you for everything, like the housework and the sarcastic comments. Please be happy with Connor." "What? Wait a minute, Cecilia," she exclaimed. I slipped past my startled mother-in-law and hurried outside. I dragged my heavy suitcase, catching the bus back to my parents' house. When I recounted the whole ordeal, my parents burst into uproarious laughter. Even I was annoyed by their laughter, as if they were mocking me. I muttered, "Hey, it's not a laughing matter," I interjected. Sorry, Cecilia. You were quite the character, getting so worked up over a comment about your parents," my dad chuckled. Was it a case of an eye for an eye? Even my usually reserved mother couldn't contain herself, covering her mouth and shaking with laughter. "Don't worry, Cecilia. One day Connor will find you an apartment," my dad teased. "Dad, what are you talking about? There's no way Connor would let me have a place," I replied incredulously, but my father simply laughed along with my mother, never explaining his words. In time, work and other thoughts crowded my mind, and I settled into a routine living with my parents. We saw each other every day, but we never mentioned the apartment incident again. 6 months passed since Connor kicked me out of the apartment. Exhausted from early morning commutes and late-night overtime, I found myself leading a lazy life, sleeping through the day on my days off. Unexpectedly, my parents approached me one day while I was still half asleep. "Hey, finally awake. We're thinking of visiting the apartment where Connor lives. Want to join us?" my father asked. Still groggy, I couldn't quite grasp what my father was saying and tilted my head in confusion. Seeing me standing there lost in thought, my mother lost her patience and gave me a forceful push from behind. "Come on, get dressed quickly. Put on something really nice," she encouraged. Following her lead, I put on a dress. I had never worn it before. It was a high-end brand, quite expensive, gifted by my parents for my birthday. So I had never felt the inclination to wear it and kept it tucked away. Upon closer inspection, I noticed both my mother and father were also dressed in high-end clothes they wouldn't typically wear. It seemed as though they were subtly flaunting their earnings. Before I knew it, we were standing in front of the apartment building where Connor had lived. I half expected to be turned away at the auto-locked entrance, but that worry was unnecessary. The person we were looking for was right there in the entrance, looking dumbfounded. Connor and his mother-in-law stood surrounded by a large amount of luggage, frozen in place. Hey, Cecilia, what's going on? We've been kicked out of our apartment," Connor exclaimed, his face a mix of confusion and embarrassment. "Kicked out? Did you not pay the rent?" I asked, thinking it was an obvious question, but Connor looked away shamefaced. "I paid it. I even went into debt to make the payment," he admitted quietly. I was utterly dumbfounded by Connor's confession. As I suspected, the claim that mother-in-law was earning money was a lie, yet they had kept up the pretense of living in a luxury apartment, even going into debt for it. If it were me, I would have moved out long ago. "Why were you kicked out? Did you cause any trouble or something?" I pressed further, but Connor shook his head, clearly clueless. Mother-in-law, who had been silently listening, also seemed at a loss, her gaze fixed on the luggage in the entrance. The awkward silence was broken by my father's sudden laughter, echoing through the entrance. My mother, elegantly covering her mouth, joined in. "What's so funny, Dad?" I asked, puzzled. "No, I'm sorry, it's just amazing. Connor, we'll give you another room if you don't want to use this one. We can arrange for a new one." My father chuckled. "What? What are you talking about?" Connor's voice rose in confusion, mirroring mine. Mother-in-law, like me, appeared bewildered, her gaze wandering between us. "Didn't you know? This apartment has been owned by our company for the past 3 months," I explained, my voice tinged with disbelief. Mother-in-law's mouth fell open in astonishment, unable to comprehend. It was an understandable reaction. I hadn't disclosed to Connor that my father was the president of a real estate agency, and more importantly, that my mother held a similar role as president of a subsidiary within my father's company. Together, they formed a successful entrepreneurial couple. Perhaps I inherited their entrepreneurial genes, considering my exceptional talent in sales. Connor had likely misunderstood my family's financial status based on the clothes we wore during our first meeting and the fact that I attended college on a scholarship. However, that assumption was mistaken. Connor's frustration turned towards me. "Why didn't you tell me Cecilia's dad is the company's president? If I had known, I would have." "And what if you had known? Just so you know, I'm not living here on my parents' dime, unlike you, who's always relying on mother-in-law," I interrupted sharply. Surprisingly, it wasn't Connor, but my mother-in-law who quickly grasped the reality of the situation. Perhaps she assessed the hierarchy by observing my mother's high-end clothing. Suddenly, she seemed to gauge my parents' mood before speaking tentatively. I sold the house because Connor said to move here. If we're kicked out, we'll have nowhere to live." Mother-in-law glanced at my parents' stoic faces, but neither of them cracked a smile. It was unnerving even for me, their actual daughter, to see their serious demeanor. My mother softened her expression, trying to reassure mother-in-law gently. "You've been behind on rent for over 3 months, haven't you? We've sent reminders and made many calls, but received no response. We've had to proceed with eviction." I glanced at Connor, wondering if he truly was behind on rent. He quickly looked away, signaling he could only manage to pay his debts for the first 3 months. Mother-in-law appeared equally uncomfortable, visibly unsettled by my mother's scolding. "Can't you do something about it? Please, you're the company's president," mother-in-law pleaded with my parents. However, my father firmly pushed her away. "I am the president, and I've decided on the eviction. You must comply. Trying to live well without paying rent? Isn't that too selfish?" my mother added, tone unyielding. Cornered by my parents' sternness, mother-in-law turned to Connor for support, but he remained motionless, as though he was abandoning her, unwilling to get involved. Anger surged within me again at his indifferent behavior. "I've thought about it for 6 months. I can't reconcile with you, Connor. Let's get a divorce." "What? Wait, divorce?" Connor stammered, visibly flustered. I glared at Connor, my resolve firm. I can't live with someone who insults my parents. My parents looked at me, almost dazzled by my declaration. Now what am I going to do? Connor fell to his knees, dejected. As much as I wanted to watch his pitiful display, I couldn't be heartless. "You need to find a way to pay the overdue rent. Why not sell all your furniture and belongings? You won't have anywhere to take them anyway." I glanced at the pile of Connor and mother-in-law's belongings cluttering the entrance. Despite the unpaid rent, there were numerous luxurious items, brand-name products, expensive watches. Selling them might ease their financial burden. Feeling a twinge of reluctance to leave them stranded, I efficiently sorted through the unattended luggage on the floor. "The truck should be here soon. Let's transport everything to our warehouse for now," my father suggested, joining in to help. As Connor and mother-in-law stood helplessly by, the belongings that had cluttered the entrance were swiftly stowed away, leaving only valuable brand clothing, jewelry, and watches. "Why don't you visit our shop later? We also buy watches and jewelry," my mother offered with a businesslike smile, handing her business card to mother-in-law. It was a move that dazzled me completely. She had evicted Connor and his mother-in-law and still managed to promote her business. I felt like I could never quite catch up to my parents. They were ruthless in business, a trait I still struggled to emulate. Lost in thought as I observed my parents, my father spoke calmly. People who judge others by appearance and call them poor don't belong in this apartment. With those words, I realized my parents held a grudge against Connor for his earlier remarks. Desperate to pay the rent, Connor resorted to borrowing money everywhere. Lenders, colleagues, superiors. Soon, it became a topic of gossip in the company that Connor never repaid his debts. Ultimately, Connor lost his job and was forced to resign after repaying all the money he had borrowed from company employees. Mother-in-law, who had been living off him, likely shared in the guilt. After being evicted from the apartment, mother-in-law moved into the company dormitory with Connor and started working part-time at a factory that belonged to my father's corporate group, a fact that seemed almost comical. 1 month after Connor was kicked out, I successfully divorced him. Additionally, as a lifetime gift, my parents gave me a room in the apartment, and I now lead a comfortable life. Work remains busy, but I've been promoted for my sales skills. Now single, I'm contemplating dedicating even more time to my career.